Welcome to the Redhead Reveal podcast. I am Jenn Pinkerton, your Redhead host, a psychotherapist, high-performance coach, writer, and speaker. As a connection expert, I help people reveal their connectedness within relationships, transforming from the root causes of beliefs and behaviors that hold them back from thriving in life. Let's talk about how you're thriving. If you are looking for a great way to have some relational self-awareness, you've got to learn from Dr. Solomon. She's coming up next and has a lot of information for us on having this compassionate inquiry with ourselves and our relationships, working with intimacy and trust and communication and commitment. Stay tuned. All right, welcome. I'm excited today to have Dr. Alexandra Solomon, who is an amazing author of quite a few books. We have Love Every Day. We've got Taking Sexy Back. We've got Loving Bravely. And I was really excited when I read Love Every Day because it was like these snippets of wisdom, so many different approaches and aspects relationally that were so important. So I'm excited to have you here to talk about that. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you.
You're a teacher, you're a therapist, you're an author. I think you're on faculty, right, at Northwestern University. You teach courses there. You've got so much knowledge to impart with us. So where do we begin? I would love to have you just tell me, what is the main focus of your work?
Well, the main focus of my work is relationships specifically. I spend most of my time talking about intimate relationships, but certainly family relationships and friendships and work relationships. So basically the overarching theme of my work is what I call relational self-awareness. So helping us develop an ongoing, curious and compassionate relationship with ourselves that helps us lovingly and gently and humbly take responsibility for our part of the dances that we do in relationships. I think it's so easy to look at what others are doing to make our lives difficult. And I think where the rubber hits the road, where transformation happens, where growth happens, where healing happens, is when we can also just gently hold up that mirror and look at our own part of the dance. So that's the center of my work, whether I'm teaching or speaking or doing therapy or talking to my husband. That is always the central thesis.
And that aligns with the work and the approach that we talk about here on this podcast so much, because a compassionate approach is really important to be able to be so kind to ourselves as we look at how we're showing up in relationships as well. And as I dove into your book, the most recent one, Love Every Day, I liked how it was broken down in these specific practices to really deal with variety of things, intimacy and communication and commitment. And you had these really very simplistic in the way that it was easy to grasp. And you took something that was complex and made it an easily grasped way to say, okay, this is something that I can look at, a way that I can address specific things in my relationship.
Yeah, I always have, my whole life, I have loved that sort of one a day, 365 kind of version of a book, because it feels like getting a little gift from an author every day. And so it was really fun to be the one creating that. But I think it also, as I got deeper into that framework, I realized that there's so many parallels. There's a really strong parallel between the format of the book and how therapy goes. Therapy is not just like, you sit down with your therapist gives you the one unitary framework that holds your whole life together. No, therapy is an iterative process, right? It's session after session of you and the therapist, or the two of you and the therapist, if it's couple therapy, kind of looking at the patterns and the themes and making like a 1 degree shift, every time. It's not, change happens slowly and with practice and with stumbles. So I liked that kind of bite-sized model. And I think it also parallels what a couple's relationship is like, same thing. Yes. There's not a marriage is not about that grand sweeping gesture, although those are nice once in a while. Marriage is like, okay, what am I going to not say today? Or how am I going to, show up today? How am I going to handle these little moments that can either be moments of connection or moments of miss? So, the frame of the book, I think has got some symbolism there that I have liked thinking about and talking about.
And I like that. I like it broken down the way you did. I used to love those calendars where it would be, you would turn the page and each one would tell you some sort of thing. I think it's easily digestible in that way. And I think when someone reads this book and recognizes you can break it down, it feels very manageable. Whereas sometimes I think a lot of couples are reticent to approach therapy because of that overwhelming sense of, oh gosh, we have to break everything apart. We've got to dig so deep. And it becomes, I think, sometimes a barrier to the entry of couples therapy for the fear of what all are we going to uncover? How big is this going to be?
Yeah. I've been thinking and talking a lot about something I've started to call the acceptance change dialectic. Like I think a lot in terms of dialectics, this idea of multiple competing truths being, needing to be held at the same time, that kind of both and I think with a couple, it's so easy for couples to get polarized, I think because there are two things that are true at the same time. One partner ends up holding one and one partner ends up holding the other. And I think that so often happens when a couple is talking about couples therapy, where one partner is saying, we're fine. Like, look at us, we're fine. And the other partner is saying, no, we're not. We have problems. We need to, have help and support. And they're both right. And they're both wrong. The partner who's saying we're fine is perhaps afraid, to your point, afraid of kind of peeling back the layers and starting to look at things for fear that it's going to unravel the whole darn thing. And the partner who's got their finger on the pulse of the problems also needs to be reminded of the resilience, of the triumph, like of the strength. So it's like they both are holding on to one part of the picture. And then, I think the real healing comes when people can really appreciate, like, thank you for always seeing that we do have a lot of strength. And then it's also like, thank you for always insisting that there's room to grow and room to improve and room to keep evolving.
Mm-hmm. And that room to grow, I think, is important to mention too, because oftentimes I think one of the very reasons that couples start to be disconnected or have these disconnected gaps in them is because of the lack of mutual growth, where one person is growing, the other person is not. And there has to be this idea that every relationships have an evolution to them. We don't start off in one place and end up in the same place we were when we were dating. We evolve, we grow, life happens, we experience different struggles and transformations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, just to kind of add a gendered piece here, because the way that I often see it playing out for a cis hetero couple, especially, is she's the one who's saying, I'm growing, I'm evolving, now I'm into yoga, now I'm doing this, now I'm listening to podcasts, and he's not. I think that's so often how it goes. And I think there's a couple of things at play here. One is, I think, under patriarchy, which is a system that affects all of us, that hurts all of us, we teach our boys from a very early age to shut down their emotions, to not, we teach them to equate emotions with weakness. And so I think we really do kind of like hinder, we don't teach boys the beauty of being confused, the beauty of asking questions, the beauty of continuing to seek. We teach boys to be certain, to be sure, to have the answers, to never ask for directions, that old like kind of stereotype about men not asking for directions. And then in marriages, we end up punishing them for not continuing to grow and change and evolve. So it ends up being, I think for a woman who's looking at her male partner, she sees him as stuck and not growing. And I think it's important just to kind of like widen the lens and look at the big factors. Not that it lets him off the hook. And I do think part of masculine healing is starting to embrace the not knowing, embracing the uncertainty, sitting with the questions, like being comfortable with questions, bringing questions to his partner, to himself, to his community of people who also are, healing together. But I think that I think we tend to make personal something that is, far more systemic. Mm-hmm. But I wonder what you think. I wonder what you think.
No, I mean, I think that makes such perfect sense. And I think all that is inevitable. That is the way people were raised, the way, as exactly what you're talking about, cis hetero men were raised, especially in that aspect of how they're going to show up in a relationship. And I think it absolutely affects the relationship, and it prevents, maybe that grasp on a different perspective.
Mm-hmm. And I also, tell me what you think about this. I also think that sometimes we women are a little bit at risk of acting as if we have the corner on the market of what appropriate growth and evolution look like, right? So if I'm looking at my male partner and saying, I'm growing and he's not, am I perhaps missing ways that he is growing, but they don't look like the ways that I'm growing? Is he Is he softening? Is he taking his foot off the accelerator? Is he defining his worth in, ways that go beyond the dollar and the paycheck, or whatever, however that looks. But I wonder sometimes if women kind of paint their male partner with this broad brush of he's not growing and changing, and she's missing the ways that maybe growth for him doesn't look the way that growth for her looks. I think that's a possibility sometimes.
That makes a lot of sense. And also it leads me to think, what if that other partner had maybe done some evolution, had already done some growing before they met you, and they're now in a place where they're feeling really good and you're just up to that. But then there's this feeling of I'm the only one changing, and change can be so scary. When either partner is changing, sometimes that is a fear of, okay, am I going to like myself as what I'm becoming now? And are you still going to like me in the new version of what I'm becoming?
Yeah. And by the way, change, I think change and acceptance have to exist as like an inhale and an exhale, because change that is unchecked is cancer, right? Like that is like constant growth without stop. Like that is what cancerous cells do. So it's not like, I think we have this, like, especially in this moment, in this space that you and I live in, it's like all growth, all change, all evolution, but there's a time and a place for also for rest and for like embracing, who we are and turning our energy towards things that aren't all about how do we grow?
Yeah. And you're right. It has to be also, am I at peace? I don't have to always be in motion and forward motion. Can I be content and at peace in where I am now? And can I relish in the maybe accomplishments, or even, I don't know, maybe a sense of pride of look how far I've come. Look at, where I am now, and sit in that space and enjoy being present in that moment. Because I agree with you. If everything is this forward motion, that's also exhausting.
Totally. And it's, maybe like, what is all the forward motion keeping you from sitting with, is there a way that is keeping you from sitting with whatever discomfort you might feel if you were to pause and rest?
Right. It's a trauma response, basically, to almost be in consistent flight. Let me pour myself into something else because maybe I don't want to sit with what hurts me. Distraction.
Yeah.
You talk about zingers, and I know you have a quote about zingers. I think you had said, let's see, I had it here about that let's see, I'm trying to think if I had that quote here. If you want a thriving, intimate relationship, eliminate zingers from your vocabulary that create hypervigilance and erode emotional safety. And I love that idea of zingers. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is an Instagram post that I did. I put up a couple of weeks ago, and it's so, it's this space. I've been a psychologist for over 20 years, and I always have been interested in this like public facing translational work. But like back in the day, it would be, me in conversation with a journalist who was writing a story, or me doing a 5-minute segment on TV. And now to have this phone where I can just like create, like write for a little while and then share it with the world. It's like I have this like living laboratory of, what kind of lands and what doesn't.
Right.
Did that post about zingers, and it really took off. It landed for people. So it's, I think we talk a lot about narcissism and, like kind of really harsh language. And I think that's obviously very important to surface toxic perpetual dynamics. But I really wanted to kind of direct our attention to these like sub-threshold, just maybe it's like just a few words, like just a little zinger. And so the examples of the zingers were things like, I could have told you that, or why don't you look where you're going? Or just like these little things, or like, just like a little one-off comment.
Little stab.
It's not an insult. It's not name calling. It's just a dig. It's just like a thing where you don't have to say it. It doesn't have to be said. And oftentimes when we do a zinger, we can kind of hide behind like, I didn't mean it, or it wasn't that big of a deal, or that wasn't what I meant, because it's just little and it's quick and it's subtle.
Well, am I hearing you say that these zingers are also passive aggressive then?
They're passive aggressive. And they feel to the zing-y. They feel like they're coming. It feels like, that's why I was highlighting the kind of the way that it erodes emotional safety. Is it's like, I can't fully let down with you if I know that one out of every 100 things you say is kind of this diggy zing, it means I can't fully let down because I'm not sure when it's going to happen. And especially if we can't talk about it together, like, hey, ouch, that hurt my feelings. If when I bring it to your attention, if your response is like, Al, it wasn't that big of a deal, then that also is going to reinforce for me that I can't let my guard down. And so we're not talking about name calling. We're not talking about contempt. We're just talking about those little one-off passive aggressive, which is the passive aggressive nature of it is like, okay, so if you're the zinger, check in with yourself. What is it when you want to say like, I told you so, or, whatever, you're going too fast. When you're saying that, what is the thing that you're feeling and how might you more directly bring up your concern?
And it's a fear, I think. And maybe that fear is, I don't want to cause problems. Maybe the fear is, I brought something up before and I wasn't met with positive regard or interest, or maybe it felt dismissive. And so now I've adopted this new skill set, maladaptive coping style to deal with, I don't feel heard.
Yeah. I've been married to my husband for almost 26 years, and he's not a zinger of a person at all. But I had noticed like twice yesterday, he had like said these things where I just was like, ouch. Like, and I didn't say it out loud, but I just like inside of me, I was like, ouch, like that is not how he usually talks to me. And then we went for a walk and he was like, I have something to raise with you. And he had a concern, like kind of a bigger, deeper concern that he needed to process with me. He hadn't brought it to my attention yet, but I sure knew something was up because he had, a couple of times throughout the day said things to me that he just otherwise wouldn't have said. So yes, so the zinger for him was he hadn't yet figured out when and how to bring something really important to my attention, but it was coming out. It was coming out some kind of a way, and in a way that I knew something was coming. I didn't quite know what it was, and then we talked about it. And so I would bet dollars to donuts that today he's not going to do zingers. It was a symptom. So
right. And he felt hurt because y'all processed it. You talked about it. You were able to give each other that time, to deal with whatever the feelings were.
Yeah. So, right. For the zinger, it is like that check-in of like, okay, so what is it that you aren't saying? And, it's time to bring it up.
And I think language is one of the key parts that people miss. We all talk about communication, but it's bigger than that. It's understanding these language styles. And like you talked about being able to ask, what do you need me to understand or acknowledge? And I love that phrase. And you have that in your book. And I think that when people are armed with phrases and ways to use language in an approach to be able to talk about things where it's met in a positive way, that can be really kind of a game changer in a relationship.
Yeah, there was something, I was coaching a husband a few weeks ago in a therapy session. I was like, can you say it to her this way? And he was like, that's not how I talk to her. It's like, okay, well, so two things are true. One, put it in the language that suits you. And two, like, you literally pay me money week after week to learn new ways of talking, right? So like the fact that this isn't language you use probably highlights that's part of why you're here, is because this isn't language that you use. Yeah. So that is, and it's sort of like when I think about couples therapy, it's top down and bottom up. I mean, some of it is bottom up. It's understanding our childhood wounds. It's understanding our family of origin dynamics. It's understanding the way that we inadvertently trigger our partner's old defenses and old patterns. That is certainly part of the healing, is that bottom up healing. Yes. But the top down matters, like learning different ways of talking, learning different, like literally like different words to use, because the words have energy and the words have connotations. And so that's like kind of like behavioral change that also then creates the emotional safety. So yeah, something like the example that you're bringing up was from another Instagram post where it was like, when your partner continues to bring something up from the past, rather than saying, why do you keep bringing that thing up from the past? Ask them instead, what is it about that past incident that you feel like I don't yet understand? Right? It's like seeding the possibility that your partner isn't doing this to torment you or to rub your nose in it. Your partner is bringing up the past because there is still a part of it that hasn't been processed or hasn't been witnessed, hasn't been made sense of yet.
And what would happen, I often think, if couples would all believe the best in their partner, to be able to approach it in the way you said, without where their defense is gone, where their senses of I need to make sure I feel like I'm being attacked is gone. The way you worded it is so gentle with being able to say, okay, what do you need from me? How can I acknowledge this? But I think oftentimes couples don't believe the best in our partners, their partners. So they come at situations in more aggressive or attacking kind of ways rather than making an assumption, my partner loves me.
Yeah.
So we should have the ability to have this conversation. Instead, it's like we've got to put on our armor, put on the shield to be able to go and have a conversation. And what would that look like if that wasn't necessary?
Right. Right. And certainly that feeling of I have to armor up in the space with my partner, that is a symptom. That is a symptom that the two of you have lost emotional safety. Mm-hmm. It's a symptom, but it also is a perpetuation. The more I put my armor on, the more I play a part in perpetuating the absence of emotional safety that I so desperately want and need. And so it does become like, okay, so who's gonna take off a piece of armor first? Can each of you be part of the change that you want so desperately to see and feel in this relationship? I think so often couples are like, you go first. No, you go first. You put put your guard down first. Then you put your guard down first.
That's so right.
And I think it's very easy to see, well, I can't because look at how they're behaving. And I think it's easy to see that and harder to see the ways in which our own guardedness is part of the perpetuation of this thing.
So for our, viewers and listeners who are hearing this, if they're recognizing, wow, that's me, I don't feel like I can bring something up. This doesn't feel safe to me. I'm realizing now I don't have emotional safety. And maybe I feel really lonely, from that. What would you say to that type of person who is experiencing that?
Yeah, I think one avenue is what we're talking about can you get really curious about how you approach your partner? What are some different moves that you can try? John Gottman calls it like the soft startup. Like, can you come in? Can you open the conversation with your partner differently? Can you take that deep breath, put your hands on your hips, get super brave and super vulnerable and bring the problem up differently than you have in the past? And if you really feel like you have taken responsibility for your side of the street, you have tried the soft startup, you have been as open as you can be, you have owned your part, and you're still kind of bumping up against that brick wall. That is why couples therapists exist, because when you bring somebody else into the space, you are changing. The same thing can't possibly happen because now there's a couples therapist there, but the couples therapist also who has been literally specifically trained to notice the patterns and to help the patterns start to change. And so that is, I don't know if there's anything worse than feeling lonely in a relationship or lonely in a marriage. And so if that is the experience of I am just knocking on the door and my partner will not open the door, it really is time to bring in a resource.
And so many, I think, of these concerns come down to the exact word you're using, which is patterns. Behaviors and patterns sometimes happen in a way where we are not consciously connected to that in awareness. It's our prior, unhealed trauma or attachment wounds. It shows up. And we're not really maybe aware of that primary emotion, what's really going on. And I think that getting more personal with ourselves to understand the deeper meaning of things is so important.
Yeah, it may be, if I'm telling you my husband doesn't listen to me and you watch us interact, you might be like, wow, Alexandra, he really is trying to listen to you. But my pair of glasses, my skew is whatever. I had a father who dismissed me or, so I am hyper sensitive, understandably so, for any indication that I'm not being listened to, that I'm not being centered, that I'm not being prioritized. And so I will take any slight, inch of that and say, see, it's not safe here. It's not safe here, And so that is right. So my work is to tend to my own, inner young part of me that is so afraid of here we go again, yes. And see if I can step into the possibility that my husband is not going to do the same thing to me that was done to me in the past.
Yeah. What about situationships too? Because I feel like this even becomes a bigger problem in situationships when there's not really that structured commitment, there's not really that. And so the lack of dialogue about these deeper things, happens. There's not really this idea of we are emotionally safe enough and connected enough to have these conversations. But yet the situationship resembles a relationship on every other front. Mm-hmm. And I see that disconnect really often. I'd like to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, we have to be careful because there are situationships that are super conscious. It's like the two of us are deciding together that we have a highly flexible boundary, low commitment, but lots of intentional dialogue about it. Mm-hmm. And we have marriages that are like, signed in ink, shared property where there's no emotional safety. So I think we have to be careful that the structure of the relationship.
Label. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The structure of the relationship doesn't, I think sometimes we do that. We say, especially that marriage equals security. Well, there's a lot of marriages that don't have security and a lot of situationships that do have security, but, so they don't necessarily go hand in hand. But you're right, that is my, so I think what becomes so difficult about that lack of clarity around who are we to each other. It's one thing to not be clear about who are we to each other. It's another thing to not be able to verbalize, hey, this is unclear, and that's where the true feelings of like, I am abandoning myself. I am putting myself in a spot that feels a hell of a lot like childhood, where I see things, I sense things, but things aren't being verbalized. So I think there are lots of us for whom a situationship is wounding because I got to do the same damn thing I did when I was a kid, which is put a smile on my face and act like I don't see and feel what I know darn well I see and feel. And so that's always when I teach college students and do lots of work with young adults and situationship. I mean, there are 50-year-olds who are having situationships,
sure,
especially with emerging adults. It is so prevalent. It is so, I think for lots of good reasons, it's an attempted solution to a lot of challenges of dating as an emerging adult. But I just want, when I'm teaching about situationships, I do want people to have that really ready access to themselves about noticing where are the places that I am acting as if I don't feel the way that I feel, so that's the ultimate kind of fuzziness, is the fuzziness with like acting like my feelings don't matter, or it's okay for me to act like I don't need something that I actually do need.
And that comes down to emotional safety. I mean, that is, I love that that's such a big theme in your work, because I really view emotional safety as one of the most important, if not the most important things in a relationship to get to a place where you can thrive. To me, there is no viability or sustainability without emotional safety. I think it's that core foundation that when that's missing, all these other things can be present in a relationship. But without that, the other things can be beautiful and fun and wonderful, but without that, they can't sustain.
How are you defining emotional safety? Like, what does it look and feel like?
To me, I feel like I look at it as we have created a connection that feels safe, that we can be vulnerable and authentic. We can have conversations that are difficult, and we can actually be curious and compassionate with ourselves and with each other to have dialogue about things that matter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where it's
that would be my definition.
Yeah, where it's safe to say like, hey, something you said isn't sitting well with me, and I want to understand. Like, I want to understand more deeply what you meant when you said it. I want us to understand why I'm having the reaction I'm having, where that just becomes a kind of sitting alongside each other, looking at the thing rather than a battle of,
yes,
you're an asshole for saying it. No, you're an asshole for having your feelings hurt. That kind of like
right,
potato back and forth.
But if people are going into relationships where they have triggers, unhealed trauma, wounds from their own feeling of maybe I never felt safe growing up, I never had that in my primary love lessons of life, then it makes it, I think, doubly difficult, to have that inventory to say, oh, wait a minute, I just got in a relationship and I don't have it here either. Now that you're almost attracted to what what's familiar, versus recognizing that, to me, one of the biggest opportunities for growth is to say, yeah, I didn't have that, and I'm not going to keep looking for that again in that way. I'm going to recognize that this is a foundational need that I have, and I'm going to be upfront and honest about that. That's a need for me.
Well, and it is such a light bulb moment, or series of light bulb moments, where when people start to see like see modeled what emotional safety looks and feels like. Cause it's like, if you don't even know it was on the menu, like you
Right.
don't know what you don't know so often. And it's like, wait a
Mhm.
minute, that's, I didn't even know that was a menu option. I didn't know that
Yeah.
was a possibility. And that is so often the awakening of like, and then I think the challenge, this is to go back to the thing about growth. It's like, okay, if I partnered with you at a time when I hadn't been to therapy, I hadn't listened to a podcast, I hadn't read a book, I didn't even know about these possibilities. If we partnered during that time, and now I'm stepping in, like I have a different threshold, I have a different capacity, I have a different possibility for what I can do, what I can bring towards me. That's really when I want my partner to grow with me, because now it's saying, no, I actually can't. Remember how we used to sweep things under the rug? We used to do that. And I was okay with it because I participated in it, because I also thought that's all you
Mhm.
could do is sweep it under the rug, but I can't anymore. So can you come along with me? And I'm nervous about it. I don't quite know how to bring things up. And I'm still practicing this language, and I'm pulling out my Love Every Day book. I'm listening to Reveal for a second time to understand.
Yeah.
So we can be clunky with it, but I think that that's where I see people like really wanting a relationship to keep growing, because now I know there's a kind of depth that I didn't even know was possible before.
And I love how you articulated that. So for people who are listening, you really just gave them kind of a mini script of a way to know how to approach that in a safe way. And I like that. That was really great of you to share. We have this thing we do on the podcast where the prior guest leaves a question for the future guest. And sometimes there's this interesting continuity or lack thereof. But our last guest asked, have you ever dewormed?
Myself?
Sure. In the age of parasites and the age of gut health, it's an interesting question. I mean, our gut is our second brain. So
That's right. I have not dewormed, but now I'm going to be Googling, do I need to deworm
I
myself?
know
No.
you're going to have to listen to an episode we had on the podcast about that. I had not either, but it is on my list to do as well. What is a great question that you would like to leave for a future guest as well, Dr. Solomon?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to leave for your future guest a question that I love to bring up at cocktail parties or to anybody who will listen, which is, what is your favorite compliment to receive and why?
Oh, that's beautiful. Oh, I have to think about what my answer would be on that myself.
Yeah, I want to hear yours.
Hey, I like that. I'm gonna have to do that some thought, give that some thought. It's really a pleasure having you on here. I want to again recap. Everyone go get Love Every Day. It's an amazing book. We also have Taking Sexy Back and Loving Bravely. Dr. Solomon, it was such a pleasure to have you on this podcast today.
Thank you. It's great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me on.